Hello everyone and welcome to the Marketing Cloud API series. In the previous video, you have seen how to invoke REST API calls using AMP script from a landing page. In this video, we will see how to invoke the same use cases using SSJS from a landing page. Now, if you haven't watched the REST API calls from AMP script video yet, I would highly recommend that you watch that first, as I'm using the same use cases and concepts from there. So I may skip some of the basics that I've already covered there. Okay. So I've divided this into two videos. In the first part, we will look at the basic HTTP functions under the core and the platform libraries that we can use. And in part 2, we will look at the script util HTTP request function, which is more flexible in terms of options. Okay. So first things first, under the core library, we have the get and post functions, which can be invoked using the HTTP object as shown. Okay. The result that we get back is similar, and we can parse the details to retrieve the appropriate data that we need. Okay. When it comes to platform functions, we have two similar functions, namely HTTP GET and HTTP POST as well. The return values are slightly mixed up for these functions. I guess probably someone at Salesforce wanted to add some thrill into function calls and confuse the heck out of us users. So you will see the return is different for both of these functions. Okay. One actually is like returning the content, the other one is returning the status code, and then the status code is actually here and for the get function, and then the content is in the parameter for the post function. Okay, whereas in the core functions you can see the response that you get back is kind of consistent for the both the functions. Okay, so you'll see the documentation as well as how these actually work in an actual example later on. Okay, so if given a choice, do go for the platform functions, as they would be slightly faster. Also, I wouldn't recommend using API calls from messaging context like emails. Okay, so because that can considerably slow down your sends. So you should try to restrict API calls from cloud page resources and script activities as far as possible. Okay, and of course, definitely do build in logging capabilities to identify if there were any failures or exceptions. Okay. Now, if you come to the Salesforce documentation for server-side JavaScript and under the syntax guide for the functions. So this is the core functions that you have, like the get and the post. If you look at the get documentation, pretty straightforward. Like it has three parameters. The first one is the URL, followed by if you have any header names and values that you need to pass. And the only difference that you will see here from how we saw in the AMP script is the header names and values, they are not optional parameters that come in pairs. You have to specify all of them as arrays within an array. So all the header names you have to put in as parameters within an array, and all the header corresponding values you need to put in the second array as well. So you just pass the two arrays as parameters 2 and 3 for the get function. Similarly for the post as well. So you will see that that you have the same header names and values as well. The only additional things that you need to pass is the content type. For us, probably we use the application JSON in most cases if you're passing JSON, and then the payload string as well. Okay, so you will see here there's only showing as 4, but actually it is going to be 4 and 5. It will be the header names as the fourth parameter, and the fifth one will be the header values array as well. Okay, so it's just probably a typo that they missed adding that fifth parameter there. Now under the platform functions, you will under the content syndication functions, you will see HTTP GET and HTTP POST. Okay, so here you will see it's very similar to how we saw the core functions as well. You have the URL and then you have the header names and values, but then there is additional couple of fields that you will see. One is to specify if you want to continue the request if there is an error, or if you want to immediately stop. So you can either specify that as a boolean, either true or false. And then if there is empty content, do you want to allow empty content, or you want to return an error, or you want to skip the subscriber? So there are some additional parameters that you can use for HTTP GET. I think this was similar to how we've seen in the AMP script functions as well. And then under post, there is instead of using that those couple of parameters that we saw in the get, in post we will actually see the content type and the payload and the URL as usual, and then you have the header names and the header values, and the only addition is you will see the content where the content has to be returned, right? So in HTTP GET, you will see the content being returned is on the in the variable that you actually assign to the return of that particular function, right? So how we actually do it is you have to write that content out, and then you can parse it. and the status of that particular execution is one of the parameters that you pass, which is an array for the get function. Okay, in HTTP post it is just the opposite. Okay, here the content is actually being passed as an array in the parameters towards the end. Okay, and that is actually set as like blank at the beginning, and then it will actually be populated once the function executes successfully, and you will have the data returned in this content array. Okay, now the status code is something that you will get once the function executes as a return value into this variable here, right? So in HTTP get, you saw that that we were getting the status code as one of the parameters. Okay, and so that is why I was saying it is mixed when you use these two functions. So you need to be very careful and look at the syntax before you use it. Okay, so for the examples, we will retrieve the access token, do a post request for the triggered send like we saw last time, and then do a get request for getting the details of a specific journey. In the AMP script, I believe we try to request the details of all journeys. So what I've done is I've actually noted down the ID of one of the journeys that I have. So we will try to get the specific details of that journey using the journey ID. Okay. Now the code for both the core and the platform functions will be more or less the same, except for where we call the actual function and then passing of the response. Okay, so I'll go step by step first with the core functions example, and then in the same code we will replace the core functions with the platform functions. Okay, now as you can see, I've declared the script block with the run at equal to server option. Okay, and this is specifies that this is SSJS, and it will default to JavaScript if you don't specify the language here. Okay, so if you need to specify it as AMP script, you have to put a specifically language equals AMP script. Because I've not specified, it will default to SSJS. Okay, now for retrieving the access token, I will include the code inside a function. It's not mandatory, but just to show you how you can actually build a code for reuse when you use SSJS. Okay, so I've just declared a function here called get access token, and we will write all the code for retrieving the access token within this particular function, and then we will invoke that from the main body. Okay, so let's start with declaring all the variables and retrieving the data from our data extension, like how we saw in the AMP script example. Okay, so what I've done here is I've declared the main variables, and then I've said get or go and look up the API integrations DE for the credential name as API series. If it matches that, bring in all the rows, and I do have one matching row. So once I have that matching row, it will actually say okay, integration credentials are found, and if there's no match, then it'll give me an error message as well. Okay, so we'll write all our code for retrieving the access token within this particular if block here. Okay, so let me go ahead and get the code to initialize the variables here based on the values that we get back from the data rows variable. Once we get the lookup rows, we are getting the values from the first row that is returned. So there will only be one row that will be matching, and that's how I've actually created the data. Okay, so once I've initialized all this data, we'll go ahead and create the payload, the URL, and the content type here. Okay, so let me declare that also. So as you can see here, the payload for the getting the access token, the grant type, the client ID, the secret, and the account ID, I've mentioned all that over here. Okay, and then the auth URL using the tenant ID that you have received, and we are using the V2 token authorization URL, and then content type is application JSON. Okay. Now finally, to invoke the request, and this is going to be a post request, right? So we will have to use the http.post core function. So let me put that over here. You can see, okay. So I'm using the variable response to get the response back, and then we are doing the http.post. We'll pass the auth URL here, okay, and then the content type is application JSON, and then we have built the payload as well. Okay. So once we get the response back, it will actually be in the form of this response.response. Okay, so there is two things that we can usually get. So let me show you. If you want to output that code, it will actually be in this format. So I've written the output here in case you need to want to debug it at any point in time. So if you want to see the status code, it will be response.status code, and if you want to see the response that is returned back, it is response.response. Okay, so make sure this is capital and this one is camel case, otherwise it will be an error. Okay, SSJS is case sensitive, so you have to be very sure that you follow the case properly. Okay, so I won't be outputting the values here. I will actually be doing that in the main function once I get the response back and parse it. So in order to return the value from here, I want to first actually parse that, and using a parse JSON function here. Okay, so let me put that here as well. So what I'm doing is I'm actually using the platform function parse JSON. It will parse the response that is being returned. Now one thing you need to be noting here is don't use response or just response alone. You have to use the array and specify that as the first record within that response. Okay, for some reason, like if you don't use this, you will actually get a error with the security descriptor error. So you have to make sure you specify when you are parsing using the parse JSON function, you have to specify this array here with the first record within that response, otherwise it will not work. Okay, so now we will go and write the code in the main block. Okay, so this was the function that we have written. Now in order to invoke that function, we will write the main code, and I will include that main code inside a try catch block. So in case if we run into any exceptions or errors, we want to make sure that it is caught and we don't get a regular error that we see in the landing page with no idea of what the error is about, right? So using the try catch block is very useful when you want to debug, and if there is any errors that when you're writing the code, you will be able to immediately see if there is a problem. Okay, so the first thing that we will do within the try catch block is to go ahead and invoke our function that we just wrote. So the get access token, right? So I'm actually using a variable here called JSON response, where I will get the return from the get access token. So whatever we are returning from here, it will get assigned to this JSON response. Okay, and then once that JSON is returned, we know that there is actually two nodes within that JSON, which is access token and the REST instance URL. Both of these I'm actually assigning to the variables that we see here, auth token and REST URL, and these two we will output. Okay, so we'll go ahead and run this right now, and then let's see if this is working. So we should ideally be able to see that that the integration credentials were found, and then if it works successfully, we will be able to see the auth token and the REST URL as well. Okay, so let me bring up the page here. So this is the same the Dropbox setup that we have seen earlier. So I'm actually using retest content to render that page that we saw in VS Code. So let me go ahead and refresh this now. Okay, so as you can see, successfully the integration credentials were found, and the REST API access token request, we have the access token and we also have the REST API URL. Okay, so now we go back to the code, and then we can work on the rest of the body here. So now that we have the access token and the REST URL, we have to build out the details for the triggered sent post request. Okay, so for that we need to have the details for the payload, the actual URL. We have to build the authorization header and the header value as well, right? So let me put that over here. Okay, just to explain, so this is the payload. Okay, so we had seen this as a JSON in the AMP script example. So I'm just concatenating everything into one single string here for the payload. Okay, and then the API route, now that we have the REST URL already stored here from the return from the access token request, we can append the route with specifically for the triggered sent. Okay, and the bearer token, as you have seen before, it has to be bearer space the authorization token, that is the authorization header that we need to pass. And like we saw in the syntax, we are not just separating it out as header names and values as just parameters. So there will be one array for the header names and one array for the header values. So if you have multiple headers, you have to put comma here and keep on adding the additional headers, and corresponding values should go in the header values array. Okay, in this particular case, we only have one header pair to be sent, so it is authorization and the bearer token. So just one value each, we can add that to the these two arrays. Okay, so now that we have declared all the variables here, we can go ahead and then actually do the invoking. So let me put in the function to invoke the HTTP post. So as you can, very similar to how we did within the function for the auth token, here we have HTTP post, and then we are calling the API route that we just built here. The content type is application JSON. Payload we have already specified here. Okay, the header names and header values we have also mentioned over here as well. So that is the HTTP post request. Okay, And then if you go ahead and want to output the response, we can put it here. Like I mentioned, the status code will be actually the response will be stored within the REST response here. So dot status code, and then if you want to see the actual content being returned, you can do dot response as well. Okay, so I'm not going to be doing any parsing of this data after this, so that's why I'm not going to use any parse JSON function. I'll just output it here. But if you need to parse the data for further processing, you can do that like how we saw here as well, like using the platform function parse JSON. Okay. Now, before we try out this code, I'll also go ahead and add in the code for the GET request. So like I mentioned earlier, we have one particular journey that we can go and retrieve. So this is the journey ID that I have. Okay, and then for this one, the API route will change, right? We have instead of using the messaging message definition sends, we will use the interaction v1 interactions, and then we have to specify the journey ID because we want to get the details of only this specific journey. Okay, and we can specify that here, and then instead of HTTP post, we'll use the HTTP get. Okay, so we will pass the route, the header names and header values. In this particular case, because it is not a post request, we don't need to give the content type and the payload. Okay, so we can exclude that. So we just need to provide this same like how we have received the response earlier. It will be the response.status and response.content. The only thing is make sure, like for post request, they use .status code and .response. For get request, it is .status and .content. Okay, so don't get confused. Make sure you refer to the documentation if you forget what is the specific value that you need to give for accessing the nodes in the response. Okay, so now that we have declared all this, let's go ahead and test our code. So if I refresh this, I should get my next access token. Okay, I've received the access token, and this is the first post request after the access token that we received. So this is the triggered send, accepted 202, and this is the response that we got, right? And there was a recipient send ID, and then it is actually queued for sending out. And then after that we did the get request as well. Okay, so as you can see, status code is 0, which means it is successful. So if you wanted to see which one is that under get, okay, they don't mention the status codes here, but I think in HTTP post and get they specify the function codes here. So 0 indicates status is okay for a get request. Okay, so going back to our code page here, so status code 0 means it was okay, and then this is the entire response for that particular journey ID that we specified. So you can see this is the ID that I specified, so I've got all the details for that journey here as well. Okay, so as you can see, it's pretty straightforward to use the get and post functions under the core library. Now we'll look at how to use the platform functions instead of the core functions in the same scenarios. Okay, so the code will more or less be the same. So we only will go ahead and replace the specific sections where we are calling the post and the get functions, and we will use the platform functions for those. Okay, so in the get access token function, so we will have to go ahead and comment out this one here. So we won't be using this one. Instead, we have to go ahead and declare an array here called content, and then we will have a status code that will be returned from the HTTP post function. Okay, so this is a platform.function.http post instead of the core HTTP.post function. Auth URL, the content type, and the payload we have here. And you still need to specify the header name and the header values if there is any, but for the auth token we don't have any header names or values, but you still need to pass those empty arrays. It's mandatory that you do, and the content that if you want it returned, you have to specify that as an array, and then add that as the final parameter here. Okay, now we have to get the response back and then parse it. So we will have to use a different one here. So let me paste that as well. So we have the response as the content 0 here, right? So the content array here. So you have to get the first record in that content array, and then you can directly parse, use the parse JSON function, and then pass that back to the function. Okay. The rest of the code is the same. We don't have to change anything. So you still have to go get the credentials from the API integration DE, assign that to your variables, build the payload, auth URL, content type, everything, and then everything is being passed. The only thing is, the main difference is passing that in this particular function, and then changing the way that you're going to get the response and parsing it, right? So very small changes to the actual function call and then the parsing. And once you come to the try catch block, there's nothing to change. So this is the beauty of it, right? So if when you have code like this, like if you need to make any changes in terms of inside the function, you can make a change here. And then if you see here, there is nothing that actually changes in the try catch block, like because I'm using that function, and I know that once I get the passed response, always it's going to be that node access token and the REST instance URL, right? So anything that I need to change, I just need to change within the function here, and automatically the invoking the parameter will get the passed function, and then automatically it will have all the data that we need. We don't need to make any changes here. Okay, so this is all good. Once we go down to the triggered send post request, so this is again where we will have to change. So this HTTP post function, we will go ahead and replace that. So let me go ahead and write the code for this one here, very similar to how we did the previous one in the function. So we will call this as REST content, and then the status code will be returned here, and this time we are actually sending out the header names and the header values, because now we have the authorization token, right? So we have the access token, we can put the authorization, and the bearer token we are actually passing that as a value. Like I said, this has to be passed within arrays over here. So the header names and header values will be passed as arrays, and then REST content we are already declaring it as an empty array. Okay, now even the response that we are going to get back, we have to slightly change that. So let me go ahead and output that also and show you how to use that over here. Okay, so we will use the status code will be this value that you get back here from this function. Okay, and the content is the REST content, where the parameter that you passed, and because it's an array, you have to get the first record within that. Okay, and then show that out. For the journey, same thing, we will replace the HTTP get function here. Okay, so we will declare the array here, but in this particular case we are not declaring the content, we are declaring the status code. So that is the difference between the HTTP get and the HTTP post functions here. Okay, so the content will be actually the one that is going to be returned by the platform function, while the status code is going to be passed in the parameter here. Okay, and similarly to write or output the values, let me go ahead and put in those statements as well, so we can see that when we run the code. Let me add that here. Okay, so the get status code here, this will actually be returned in this parameter. We will be able to see the status code here, and like I mentioned earlier, if it is a get request, it's going to be 0, -1, 2, etc. So it will be one of those values. So if it's 0 means it's okay, and the content, whatever content we are going to get returned, we will actually show that here as well. Okay, so now that I've replaced all the core functions with the specific platform functions, let's go ahead and execute this and see if we get a similar result to what we saw earlier. Okay, so let me go ahead and refresh this. Okay, so now you can see there is a new access token that we got generated. Okay, and we did get another triggered send again with a new recipient send ID that is also queued, and again we got the full details back for that specific journey ID using the get request. Okay, so as you can see, when you use the platform HTTP function also, it is the same result that we get when we use the core functions, right? So these are good enough for get and post request. But what if we wanted to do put, patch, or other operations like delete, requests like that for REST API? So in that particular case, we cannot use these functions, right? So that's where in our next video, we will see how to use the script.util.http request function. Okay, and that is very, very useful and flexible. It has multiple options where you can go beyond get and post request. You can even do put, patch, delete, etc. Okay, so hope this video was very useful, and thank you for watching.